Hello and welcome to Called Bank Sports. This week we're going to be discussing something that some people really want to happen and other people don't want to happen, and I'm still not sure where I fall. We're going to be talking about Mike Conley and if the Jazz are able to trade him, where they should trade him, and who they should ask for. So, the biggest thing with trading Mike Conley is the Jazz have very little leverage on trading him. It would have to be a sign and trade. So he would basically have to agree that the best way for him to get somewhere, or a good way for him to get somewhere, is to sign with the Jazz and have him trade them. And have them trade him. So I have some 4 to 5 trade options here that I think are serious options that I would consider if I were the Jazz. But the caveat that I put in place, and you can debate whether or not this is a good caveat in the comments, is he needs to go to a team that is a contender. Mike Conley isn't looking to go be Chris Paul. He's not looking to go to a team that either, just fell out of the playoffs and try to take them to a championship the next year. Mike Conley is going to want a chip this year, and he's going to look for the best way to get that. So instantly, I apologize if we have any Sacramento Kings fans, Houston Rockets fans, OKC fans, Spurs fans, and the list goes on. But those teams just were completely out of the picture to begin with. Then I had contenders that there was just no way with the guard line they have or with their current team comp that anything's going to happen. You have Golden State, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee were the 3 teams that I threw in there that he's not going there because we're not going to get Klay Thompson for Mike Conley. As happy as I would be with that trade, that's not going to happen. Phoenix Suns, they don't have the cap space if CP3 stays, but if Chris Paul disappears, they could honestly rinse and repeat, sign Mike Conley and try to run it back with Mike Conley there. But we'll get to some of the feasible trades here in a second. So the teams that I settled on actually kind of being in the market were the Los Angeles Clippers, Los Angeles Lakers, Boston Celtics, Philadelphia 76ers, and the Dallas Mavericks. So the Dallas Mavericks don't need to trade for Mike Conley because they have plenty of cap space and they could sign Mike Conley for $30 million and move on. We could, however, do a sign and trade, and you as a Mavs fan can let me know what you think about this, for Kristaps Porzingis, who has 2 years plus a player option for around $100 million left on his deal. So Dale, how do you feel about the Jazz doing a sign and trade with Mike Conley for Kristaps Porzingis?
Well, I love Conley. I think he would do great things next to Luka. Obviously, he's not the key for the future for the Mavericks. I probably wouldn't. I don't know. I wouldn't have a strong opinion. Maybe I would if the trade actually happens. Yeah. I don't think that's likely. Like one you mentioned, the Mavs have cap room, so it wouldn't make sense for Conley to say, "Hey, I'll do a sign and trade with a team that doesn't have cap room," unless the Mavs go and pull in another big name free agent that would take their cap, and in that case, they wouldn't have the cap room. So it's unlikely that happens, and I wouldn't really see that happening unless the Mavs land someone like Kawhi, and they're just going all in now, because I don't think Porzingis is a win now piece. He might not be a win in the future piece either. So that's kind of how I would break it down. I think it's super unlikely, but depending on the situation, I might be okay with it. I might be slightly against it.
See, and I'm debating personally if I'd rather just lose Conley and get nothing than get KP.
He's on a big contract. He could do good things, but I don't you saw him in the playoffs. He's just going to turn into a corner 3 guy on that big contract.
Yeah. And really where I kind of fall on that is if he was coming from his first team, I would be able to convince myself of that a lot more, like change in scenery. But I don't think it's going to be third time's the charm. A lot of the time, if you have a star player like that who things aren't just meshing like they weren't in New York, and then you trade them to another place, I just don't think that that's going to end well overall. Where you can make arguments that Lonzo Ball didn't get a good opportunity in Los Angeles, so him going to the New Orleans Pelicans, or better example of Brandon Ingram going to the New Orleans Pelicans, gave them a fresh start. but he's already had a fresh start. So that was one of those things where I could see that trade possibly happening, just because even though they have the cap to sign Conley, if Dallas could get out from KP's contract, I think they would jump at the opportunity to do that by doing this sign and trade for Mike Conley. I just said I'm not sure as a Jazz fan if I would just prefer to lose Conley and get nothing in return for that. But yeah, those are my takes. And sticking in the Western Conference, so the LA Clippers, there were kind of a few options, and I was looking. There were 3 players, plus 2 players that you could use to make a deal that would get you up to around 22 million, about there, which I think is a fair price for Conley. I kind of have things ranging from 20 to 30 million. So the Jazz might have to throw in some pieces to make it work, or the other team might have to throw in another piece to make it work. But for the Clippers, you have your choice of Marcus Morris, Patrick Beverley, Luke Kennard, or in addition to Rondo or Zubac.
Cool. What were the first 3 again?
Marcus Morris, 3 years left on his deal. Beverley, I think he has 1 or 2 years left. I can't remember. And Luke Kennard with 4 years. And then you add either Rondo or Zubac to make the trade work. I don't think the Jazz would get Zubac, but Rondo
I think that would
probably
be awesome if the Jazz could bring him in. So Kennard, he's on a big contract, which is a little scary there, but obviously it makes the money work, and he's a great shooter.
It's 4 years, 12 million a year. So it comes out to about 50 million over the next 4 years.
And I think he could fit right into the Jazz system. So out of the first 3, I would like him. Obviously, Morris wouldn't be a bad fit either. He could be an awesome fit, actually.
Yeah. He's just older. So Luke Kennard would be my preferred, but I don't think the Clippers are going to get rid of him because of that.
Morris could bring a lot to the Jazz that the Jazz are missing, so I'd love that. And then out of those last 2 of Rondo and Zubac, I would prefer Zubac. Like you said, I don't think they're going to give him up. And I would be a little worried. I don't know. If Rondo buys into the Jazz system, obviously he has a lot more he can give. He's not what he was his first few seasons, but there's a lot there. But we've seen Rondo in the past where he just wasn't happy. Dallas is the most obvious one. But he's been in places where he just didn't buy in, and you didn't get that from Rondo. So I feel like the Jazz aren't a place for Rondo, but that would be my initial worry with him. Not that he's a bad player, that he just wouldn't like it here.
Yeah. I mean, one thing you could do is you could pick up Rondo as the additional piece and then waive him, especially where he only has that 1 year left on his deal. And you'd still have to pay him, but you wouldn't have to pay for the luxury tax on him, I'm pretty sure. So that would be a nice financial decision. What this trade really doesn't do is it doesn't help the Jazz get another starting point guard. They're still going to have to look around and try to find a new starting point guard somewhere. And if you're able to pick up Zubac in this deal, then you could either look to to trade him again, or you could look to trade Derek Favors, since you wouldn't want those 3 those 3 centers on your roster, so that way you'd be able to flip a center for a point guard.
Yeah, if the Jazz could get something like that out of Mike Conley, if Mike Conley decides he doesn't want to stay in Utah, I think that'd be a good deal for the Jazz, because like you do have to consider a sign and trade. The Jazz, if they sign and trade Conley, they're not going to get equal value back, and this is how it's going to be.
Oh, don't worry. There's one trade down the line. The last trade you could argue is equal value. And the next 3 trades before the last trade, I'm honestly really a fan of. The next one is with the Lakers, where you get 2 of these 3 players. One of them's on a player option. So you get KCP. He has 2 years left. So Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. You can pick up Kyle Kuzma, who has 2 years plus a player option, or Harrell, who would have to pick up a player option to be able to be in the trade.
Cool. I honestly I kind of prefer the Clippers one a little bit more.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be against getting any of those 3 players. I would And I'm not a Kuzma fan. I thought he was going to be something, and then I kind of jumped off that wagon. But like his first year, he was almost averaging 20 points a game. So there's something there with Kuzma. I think he'd be an interesting piece. I'm not sure exactly how he would fit in with the Jazz. I did see
definitely get more length.
Yeah.
If you're complaining about the length, if you pick up KCP and Kuzma, you're not going to be complaining about length on the Jazz that much anymore.
And the cool thing, like I saw I forget which channel it was, but I saw a 2K sim of someone's where Kuzma, he was talking about, like, in real life, he said that he thinks he could be a 25 point per game scorer, which is why he's in a lot of trade talks now. He's kind of pushing his way out of LA. And so then he's like, and in this 2K sim, he went through all the teams and he's like, you know what? The best chance for him is the Jazz because there's a lot of defense there. And then obviously to make it happen, they had to trade Mitchell to make sure Kuzma got enough touches. So that's not going to happen in real life.
Yeah, that's not my jam.
He has something there. He's not like the greatest shooter in the world. He's actually a really inconsistent shooter, but give him the right role on the right team, and he can be a great third option, I think.
Yeah. No, he can definitely be a great third option. And I mean, like, again, it fixes the Jazz lengths problems. I don't know, if you're going to kind of push Royce out of the starting lineup and make room for one of those guys there. And then again, you're still stuck. If you make that move, you're probably moving Bojan to shooting guard. So you're going to have a lot more length and transition Donovan Mitchell to point guard. So that's honestly kind of where this is going, is some of these trades involve the Jazz just saying, okay, Donovan Mitchell is our point guard of the future. Keep Joe Ingles off the bench for a bit, and we lose depth at that position. But that might be what happens. If Conley gets traded, unless it's one of these, unless it's a trade where you get a point guard, Donovan's probably going to be taking over the majority of the touches, which is kind of going to stink. Like, he definitely struggles with that, and being 6'1", he doesn't always see the court as well as he could. But I guess tell that to Chris Paul. So
yeah, and he can get assists fine. I like having the ball in his hand. He just kind of has a turnover problem.
Yeah.
So if he can, I think it's more of a decision-making thing than anything else. I think he has everything. Like, he could be an excellent point guard.
And at some point, that's going to happen, right? I think everyone kind of acknowledges, especially if Conley stays a few more years, that Donovan's going to be taking over the point guard slot. He's going to become kind of like your Steph Curry, your Damian Lillard, a player that is a shooting guard who handles the ball and is able to pass, but is by no means a pure point guard. So those two teams definitely put Conley in a chance to win now, both of the LA teams. And transitioning to the Eastern Conference, for the Boston Celtics, we're not going to get Tatum. The Jazz aren't going to get Brown. The Jazz do not want Horford. They do not want Al. That deal would work well, and I'm sure the Celtics would love it, but the Jazz aren't going to do that. So here's the only trade that I could see happening. You get Marcus Smart with 1 year left on his deal to come in and play point guard. He's point guard, so he's able to come in, loses some of the offensive capability that Conley had, but he gets to play point guard. And then you bring in Tristan Thompson, who you probably end up flipping or trying or letting go. Like, Thompson is there to make money work, but I think Marcus Smart is who you would really be going for on that deal.
I think, so of the trades that we've talked about so far, for the Jazz, I think this is my least favorite.
Okay.
But I think it's the most realistic trade so far. I think the Lakers and Clippers would love Conley, but there's quite a few pretty good, like good enough to be starting on a championship team point guards out there in the open market that they wouldn't really have to give anything up for. Obviously, Conley's probably better than most of them, but that's something they have to consider. I think Boston is the kind of team where obviously they just traded Kemba. They really don't have a starting point guard, and I think Conley brings a lot of what Kemba didn't, and I think he's a better floor general. He's better at running an offense. I would say he's a better defender, but I haven't watched enough Kemba to like recently to really say that. But so I think he would fit in great with Boston. I think Boston would love this trade, and I I'm not in love with it for the Jazz, but it's definitely not a bad return. Like Marcus Smart, he can hit threes, not amazing. He's a really smart player and he's an excellent defender. So
Yeah.
he definitely adds value to the Jazz.
He kind of brings that Jay Crowder vibe that I feel like some people were talking about the Jazz missing last year, not really having an enforcer. Now when I double check this trade, they are only at 98 million currently on the roster for next year. I don't think they're going to try to re-sign Evan Fournier. Luke Cornett was only at 2.5 million. So if they bring him back, that's not going to be for much. And again, the other player that they tried to bring back was under 2 million. So would this really end up being a sign and trade? They're probably just going to pick up a point guard on the open market. If they, however, wanted to look to try to pick someone up, then make a trade for Conley, in this scenario, the Jazz will be giving them picks for the favor. The Jazz are probably going to part ways with a few first-round picks. And I don't know how I feel about that overall, to just get a couple of players with 1 year left on their deal.
Yeah, that would kind of make the trade a lot worse. That being said, in recent years, Jazz picks haven't really been great, but chances are, as soon as you start trading away picks, the picks that you trade away become good. And the one pick you trade away is going to be the one where Mitchell and Gobert injured the entire year. We get the second overall pick, and
I wish we could trade this pick, is what I wish the Jazz could do. And I think there's some issues currently. I need to look into this. I think there's a reason why the Jazz are limited in actually trading picks right now due to some obscure trading rule. But we'll see what happens.
Right now, the Jazz would have to, if they were to trade the pick, it would be after the draft. So they could make like a under the table deal, say, hey, which player do you want? And we'll give them to you for this afterwards.
Which at 30, I mean, I'm totally fine with. Even if you end up trading the first round pick for 2 second round picks, like the 30th pick is just going to be another guaranteed contract that probably doesn't work out. Yeah. So, okay. So I have two trades that the Jazz can make with the 76ers. Before that, I do want to go through just a couple other options, and one trade that a lot of people are for, but I just don't see happening. That would be a double sign-in trade for Lonzo Ball, which just the logistics of a double sign-in trade are crazy to me, and you're going to end up paying Lonzo a lot of money, since the only reason that he'd agree to that is for him to be able to get max money from the Pelicans, which is going to be more than max money from the Jazz would be. And I just don't see why the Pelicans in the end would do that unless the Jazz are throwing in a lot of sweeteners when they could just let Lonzo go and then pick up Mike. And then last of all, I don't see why Mike Conley would want to go to New Orleans.
Yeah, that's a tough one to make work.
And then another place that Conley could go and theoretically have some success would, but I don't think he could win a championship there, would be another double sign-in trade to Toronto for Kyle Lowry, who can't shoot threes. Or am I mixing him up with DeMar DeRozan? I'm not going to make any stat.
He's not a great 3-point shooter. He's like mediocre.
So again, like that's another option for the Jazz. It's better than nothing. You get a starting point guard in return. And I would do that rather than just let Conley walk. But I'm not like sitting here begging for the Jazz to somehow pull off a double sign-in trade with Toronto.
Yeah, I can't see Conley wanting to go there. I'm fine with Lowry, but I don't know. I think the Raptors would be okay with it. Nothing against Lowry. It's just I think Conley's a better player right now. So that one would be the double sign-in trades. I'd be shocked if that even got discussed.
Like that. It's just so crazy to try to work that out. Like it could theoretically happen, but again, I just think it's too much work for teams that really don't need it. And then last but not least, another team that's kind of on the fringe that would require some changing up on their end would be the Jazz making a trade with the Portland Trailblazers. What they would want is Mike Conley for CJ McCollum. That's the trade they would want, and Damian Lillard would have to commit to play off ball and to not really be the point guard. But while, again, I would prefer that trade over nothing, the trade that I would love to see that's not going to happen would be the Jazz getting Nurkic for either Norman Powell, who would have to pick up a player option to be part of the deal, or Derek Jones. But I feel like Nurkic would allow you to flip Derek Favors, have Nurkic as your backup center making $12 million a year for 1 year, and be able to have a lot more depth in the way that you can play the game.
And when Nurkic is healthy, he's a $25-30 million dollar a year player at his best when he's healthy. And so like having that come off the bench could be huge. I agree. That's not likely. The CJ McCollum one is interesting. Because McCollum, he definitely has trade value, but it's not a ton.
Yeah.
So
$30 million is a lot for him. Like when you look at how much Klay Thompson is making compared to how like CJ, I think they're both making around $30 million a year. And that's just not a comparative like output for what you're paying.
Yeah. And I don't know if I love it for the Jazz, but that's probably it. If the Blazers decide to move in that direction, they decide that's the best value they can get for him. That would be very interesting to see. Our offense would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as it was this year, you take away a little bit of playmaking, take away some defense, but add a bunch of shooting. That'd be interesting.
So my last two trades, like I said, are with the 76ers. I don't know. I've kind of been rambling most of this episode. What are there any thoughts that you have on trades that I haven't mentioned, or possibilities other than obviously Mike Conley just re-signing that come to your mind, or are things you've thought of?
I don't have any specific trades in mind. But I know that, like you mentioned the Mavericks at first, the Heat are another team talking like with the Mavericks, where both of those teams are going after a win now player. The difference is the Heat don't have as much cap room. So
okay.
Like so I wouldn't be shocked if like that's something Conley might go towards. The tough part is I don't know who the Jazz are getting. Like the Jazz definitely aren't getting a great return for Conley in that case, but I wouldn't be shocked if that's a team that at least discusses a sign and trade with Conley.
The Heat have like four to five players next year. 2 of them are team options, and they're already at like 90 to 100 million on cap space. The Heat were like banking on a free agent coming out this year. They were banking on trying to court Giannis and messed up. So I'm not going to bog down the podcast with Heat talk, but I looked at the Heat and for about 30 seconds and decided that my life was not worth trying to figure out a deal with the Heat.
Too detailed. So
this is the note I have next to the Heat. Absolute mess.
So it might happen in real life. I would not like if Conley decides to leave the Jazz, which I don't know what the talk is. I'm kind of on the fence on what I think he'll do, but I think that would be a team he probably that would be interested in talking to him, and he'd be interested in talking to. I wouldn't put them in the top 3 of teams that I think he would end up with.
Yeah. So agreed. And here, but again, trading Mike Conley away is better than just letting him walk in pretty much all scenarios. But here are the 2 trades that I'm the most intrigued in that I've saved for last. Both are with the 76ers, and this is probably my favorite one right here. George Hill and Seth Curry. So you bring George Hill back to Utah. You know, he might pick up the starting role at point guard. Joe's probably going to have to pick up his minutes. You might not be getting 36 minutes out of George Hill, but you get a solid veteran in George Hill, and you get Seth Curry to bring some shooting off the bench, you know, and just add some more depth there. And I feel like you get a lot in return for Conley.
I think I love that deal for the Jazz. I would love to have Seth Curry on the Jazz.
Yeah.
I think the Sixers really, really likes Seth, and I think it's going to be hard to get him away. If they're sold on Mike Conley, and in this case, I think they would have to have already told themselves they're getting rid of Ben Simmons no matter what before the season starts.
You're flipping Ben Simmons, and you're able to do it in such a way that you get pieces that you feel like you can replace George Hill, who I believe is their backup point guard. So you're able to somehow get another backup point guard, since Mike Conley would be the starter, obviously. And you're able to get a piece to replace Seth Curry. Like, they're trying to get some great win now pieces to put around Embiid.
Yeah, because if they do make a good trade because they're going for an all-star, and if they get another all-star in return for Ben Simmons, and that's all they have to give up for Mike Conley, I think that would be a good move for them. If they're keeping Simmons, there's no way they're letting go of Curry for even for Conley, because it just wouldn't fit with their lineup. But I think that could be a realistic one that could work out for both sides. Obviously, George Hill isn't a long-term fit at point guard. He might not even be able to start the entire season, but he's definitely, like, he adds value. He's not going to put up crazy numbers, but he'll help.
He's not going to destroy the team. And Seth Curry is a great piece to bring off the bench. A great piece to try to fit in there. And maybe it's kind of hard to mesh him and Jordan Clarkson just because of how they both play and their roles off the bench.
But, yeah, I would even consider starting Curry. I don't know. That'd be something you'd have to play around with, like test Mitchell at the 1 and Curry at the 2, and then you have the lineup of Hill and Clarkson come in with the secondary.
No, that would be a really good push there. Now you mentioned the other trade, the trade that I saw yesterday, and that I don't know how I feel about still. You mentioned that they want an all-star for Ben Simmons. Well, Mike Conley, as many of you remember, was an all-star. Ben Simmons is making about $30 million. So maybe you end up having to trade a second piece there and sign Mike at $22 million, throw in a second piece there. They're probably going to want to pick because they feel like they're giving up more than the Jazz are. And all of a sudden you're sitting there with Ben Simmons coming in. So your starting lineup is now Ben Simmons at the 1, Donovan Mitchell at the 2, Bojan at the 3, Royce at the 4, Gobert at the 5. You have a secondary rim protector. You now get to put Royce O'Neal on the second best offensive player instead of on the best offensive player. You lose some 3-point shooting, but you still have Bogdanovich, Donovan, and Royce out on the court. Like, there are some issues with this, but what are your thoughts on the Jazz making this trade?
Honestly, I feel like we could have an entire episode going through everything with this trade. Because I think
people made it to 28 minutes, this is going to be the comment section. I really hope we didn't bury the lead this far.
So, like, I don't know. There's a lot we can do with this. I'm torn on whether it would be a good thing or a bad thing. If honestly though, if it comes to a sign and trade, and that's what we get with a sign and trade, the Jazz say yes 100 out of 100 times. If you're getting Ben Simmons out of a sign and trade with Conley, they might not do it straight up normally, but so obviously if that comes to it, great. I don't think the Sixers would go for that unless they find out that's the best player they could possibly get for Simmons.
I really think it could be the best player. I really think that could end up being the case. I don't think people want Simmons.
I don't think it's ridiculous that ends up being the case.
Yeah.
And as far as Simmons on the Jazz, obviously the main thing is we now only have in our starting lineup we have 3 3-point shooters, and one of them is not really. Is
Simmons actually going to work on his shooting, or is it just him literally saying the same thing over and over again, or is this the year he's actually going to spend an off season in the gym at the 3-point line, just putting up looks?
And if that's the case, like, sweet, if we can get a 28% 3-point shooter out of Simmons, I'll take that.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing though is The Jazz, they lacked perimeter defense. So now we have top 3 perimeter defender in the league and the best post defender in the league on the defensive end. Plus, Royce O'Neal is good. He's good enough to take down.
Especially if you put him on the second option now instead of the first.
Yeah, so
that makes his job infinitely easier.
So people would hate playing the Jazz for that. That would be such a tough time because they can't drive, and their best ISO scorer is going to have a tough night every night. So on the defensive end, that's huge. On offense, you lose a 3-point shooter, but now you have both Mitchell and Simmons, who are both can get to the rim anytime they want when they have a lob threat with Gobert. So,
and you can run pick and roll with both of them. And because Gobert is in a post-up big, you're not going to run into the issue that you ran into with Embiid and Simmons, where they both need to be in the paint.
Yeah. And so it's like with that, Quinn would have his work set out for him. He would need to figure out a system to make this work. If you can figure something out to make that work, I think there's a lot of potential there. The other thing that you'd have to consider is, would Jazz fans even accept Simmons after all the beef that he's had with
so here's the thing.
Mitchell
Jazz
and
fans
Gobert?
Aren't the problem. That's not the problem I'm worried about. Like, does Donovan still have Rookie of the Year beef with Ben Simmons? Like,
he goes and steals his trophy.
We know Ben Simmons has beef with Rudy Gobert. Does Rudy Gobert have beef with Ben Simmons? Like, the hatred between the Jazz and the 76ers is like a real thing these past few seasons. So could you even make this work?
On paper, I'm fascinated by the idea. In real life, obviously, it's a long shot if it even gets discussed.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's a lot to make work. Mitchell's dealt with drama in the past, and he's always been a champ about it. So I don't think if that was the only thing holding it back, I don't think that would hold it back.
Yeah, I mean, you can now tell everyone in the comments can come at me for being a hypocrite. All of the hate I've given Ben Simmons, and now all of a sudden we're talking about him being in a Jazz uniform, and all of a sudden he might just be okay. But here's the thing. Nobody in Quinn Snyder's system is above the coach. Right? Nobody is. Ben Simmons has been above the coach his whole time in the NBA. Like, that's the fact of the matter. All of his coaches are telling him to shoot threes, and he's not shooting them. So I don't know how much Jazz DNA, as much as some people hate that phrase, he has. But I would not hate this trade. You are stuck now with like 4 years, $120 million Ben Simmons. 5 years, $150 million, I think, for Donovan. And 5 years, $205 million for Gobert. So
it's a lot of money.
There's a lot of the cap right there to those 3 guys. So you are banking on Ben Simmons, at least getting some trade value back, since right now he has really low value, which is why this trade could be possible.
Yeah, I doubt it would happen. If it happened, we'll have 3-4 weeks in a row breaking down everything that could possibly happen with this.
That would be Jazz Twitter.
Fascinating to see what Quinn Snyder would put together with a lineup like that, and I would love to try to figure out how to run an offense like that in today's NBA.
So please let us know. Do you want Ben Simmons in a Jazz jersey? Do you think it's possible? Do you think it'll work? Tell us in the comments. If we missed any trades, let us know in the comments. And if any of my trade ideas were just complete garbage, I don't know if I'll read those comments, but you can let us know in the comments. So thank you for staying with us for the whole time, and go Jazz.